All right, welcome to another episode of Fuelcast TV, where we talk about anything that's related to freedom, unity, entertainment, and liberty. This week's topic has a lot to do with freedom and liberty. A little bit of unity should be discussed in this conversation. This topic has a tendency to do the exact opposite and divide people a lot. This is a very, very touchy subject. One I have been a little bit reluctant to wade into because it is so touchy. People get very, very emotional. And part of the reason that is what I'm going to discuss here real quick. And then we've got a guest to bring in that is bringing about a lawsuit that basically is trying to show exactly what is wrong with portions of our Civil Rights Act here in Michigan, the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. So I'm always talking about how language is important. A lot of times I use it in the context of things like clean energy, because to me that's total bullshit moniker. There is no such thing as clean energy. A lot of this is derived from the Iron Pigs lawsuits over the years and how the health department in Michigan used the simple words may establish procedures to limit the gathering of people for any purpose. And those words were used for the better part of 2 years for a number of things, mainly targeted at restaurants, but citizens in general in Michigan were widely impacted by the health department's use of these words together. Emergency order after emergency order was pushed out under this guise. For restaurants, particularly, they enumerated sign-in sheets, social distancing, masks for employees and for customers, limits on capacity, limits on times, limits in your own home during Thanksgiving. You know, we're coming up on Thanksgiving, and there was a time when we were told we couldn't have more than 12 people, and they were recommended to be inside our pod. So this is why, to me, language is so important. And the ones I want to talk about today are sex and gender identity. We've had some discussions before on Fuelcast in previous episodes. Here, the Gaylord Community Schools months ago had hired a parapro at the kindergarten level. It is my understanding that that person has actually resigned. I don't think there was any reason given, so I don't think that this person ever actually worked at the Gaylord Community Schools. But so we've discussed this a little bit, and I've had Christine Geiger on the program before. She's the owner of Studio 8 Hair Lab over in Traverse City. That has become embroiled in some controversy for her remarks that she made on her Facebook page back in July. So a lot of this conversation is kind of coming from that. And some obvious cultural shifts with the trans movement and some other things in gender identity, gender expression. Those two kind of are interchangeable in a lot of these statutes that we see, and a lot of the language that's coming out of schools and things like this. So we thought it was important to try and take a level-headed approach to this, and a logical approach. That's where I try to come from most times, is a point of logic, as a baseline at least. We see that there's not a whole lot of logic being used these days by several people, and not just in Michigan. So the baseline we have to talk about for sex, gender, and gender identity or expression generally is a dictionary term. Now, when you look at Merriam-Webster's dictionary terms, they're relatively simple. When we look at them, let's see. So when we talk about sex, this is Merriam-Webster's dictionary. Either of the two major forms of individuals that occur in many species and that are distinguished respectively as male or female, especially on the basis of their reproductive organs and structures. B, the sum of the structural, functional, and sometimes behavioral characteristics of organisms that distinguish themselves as males and females. C, the state of being male or female. And as we can see, Merriam-Webster's dictionary sets up male or female. So you really only have one of two choices there. And then when we come over to gender, gender has a couple of more definitions to it. One talking about being a subclass. Two is the traditional term of sex. The behavioral, cultural, or psychological traits typically associated with one sex, gender. Then we go on to talk about gender identity. So this is where that subclass gender now goes on to be defined a little bit further. And if you look it up and you look at the terms and look at the history of these words, you can see how in the last couple of years, these words have been added to, right? So gender now becomes gender identity or gender expression and takes gender into a different category, right? So that's what the first portion of this definition is talking about, is a subclass, gender identity, gender expression. So there we have sex, gender, and then gender identity. And as these definitions explain, quite simply, sex and gender traditionally for thousands of years have expressed male or female biological traits, chromosomes, right? And then gender expression and gender identity moves a little bit more over into the column of societal definitions. To me, in my opinion, this is where we start to get some of the trans definitions. Instead of sexual identification, you now are getting into a biological orientation. Right? So simply put, a man sexually identifies with a woman, or a gay person, a gay man or a gay woman, sexually identifies with the same sex, right? So it's a sexual identification. It has nothing to do with your chromosomal or your biological makeup. Or going one step further, right, when you say biological makeup, if some people choose to believe that the plus portion of LGBTQ plus is an animal or a thing, that's where biological makeup or biological orientation comes into play versus sexual orientation. And I think that this is important because for years, the gay community has struggled for their rights with sexual orientation. Now, specifically with that class of individuals, they have fought for government rights as a class. Now, what we're seeing is the gender identity, not a sexual orientation, but a biological orientation that is moving away from the sexual orientation that the gay population has been fighting for the last, say, 50 years at least. I'm not an expert in this. Again, I'm just talking about the plain language. So we have sexual orientation and biological orientation. This, to me, is the crux of this whole issue around civil rights laws and protecting classes. In 2023, the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act, as it sits now, protects many classes. It protects race, religion. I have it sitting right here. So it's MCL 37.2302. And it says you cannot deny service. This is accommodations. This actually happens to be the portion about printing, posting, or circulating advertisements. So this is portion B, section 302B. You can't discriminate on the basis of religion, race, color, national origin, age. Move into 2024, the amendment says gender identity or expression. Marital status is also included in the 23 version. right? You can't discriminate against a gay couple, right? Um, so moving into 2024, Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act gets amended to include sexual orientation and gender identity or expression. Um, Though that's important. That's very, very important. As it sits right now, we're talking about discrimination on the basis of sex. And when you look at the definition of sex is a man or a woman. It's not something other, as in non-bi, an animal, let's say. Sex is defined as man or woman, or male or female, if we need to get even more dumbed down, right? Across all species, you'll find a male or a female, right? That's what we're talking about. That's what Elliott Larson protects right now in 2023 is race, religion, color, national origin, sorry, age, sex, marital status. That's it. Next year, they introduce sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. That should be coming around, I believe, the end of February is when that portion, the amendment to Elliott Larson, will take effect. 90 days, sine die, after the end of this legislative session, which I believe is supposed to be the first week of November. So here we have a dynamic of an individual in Traverse City, Michigan, who posted on their social media comments about if you identify as anything, and I'm paraphrasing, anything other than man/woman, please seek services at a pet groomer. Then she said, if you have a preferred pronoun, we apologize if we simply refer to you as hey you. 3 individuals have now filed civil rights complaints for the discriminating advertising on Facebook of Christine Geiger from Studio 8 Hair Lab, as well as Traverse City has a non-discrimination ordinance. I believe it's maybe $100 fine. They also looked into possible sanctions against Studio 8 Hair Lab for these comments. What is interesting is recently Studio 8 Hair Lab has filed a lawsuit in Grand Traverse County alleging that these 3 individuals from her area, the Grand Traverse County area, one man identifying as a woman, again, simply just a gay man, or I'm sorry, a trans man, and then 2 women that I'm assuming women, given their given names, that identify as non-binary. Now, what's important to note is that non-binary does not put you into a male or male or female category. Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act cannot discriminate on the basis of sex. The definition of sex is identifying as one of either a man or a woman. 2 of these 3 individuals are suing for discrimination for a Facebook post that they read. They were never denied a service at Studio 8 Hair Lab. These 3 individuals were never denied accommodation, which is what it's called in the LA. You cannot, I'm a restaurant owner. If a person comes in a wheelchair and I don't reasonably accommodate this person, whether my doorways are too small, whether I have patio tables that this person cannot get their wheelchair around, or worse off, my bathrooms aren't ADA compliant. That is a real case of discriminating against an individual with obvious class protections. What's interesting when looking at these 3 individuals that have filed these civil rights complaints, on the basis of advertising and discriminating against them for sex, these three individuals on its face appear not to qualify for any kind of complaint through the Civil Rights Department. Now, I'm not saying any of this to take a side one way or the other. This, to me, is a very interesting case from a state agency that has real power and has a justifiable existence. Discrimination is a real thing, especially in housing, big time. So this department has a place in our government. It's unfortunate that it may seem that it's being co-opted by some of the new language that's coming around next year. Again, this is just my opinion, but this is why I find this case fascinating, and some of the things that Christine has gone out of her way to say on social media. It looks like she kind of, I wouldn't say knew what she was doing, but by being explicit and saying male and female, and then by specifically not saying that she's going to deny anybody service, we just may simply refer to you as hey you, other than your preferred pronoun, which obviously pisses a lot of people off, and I understand that. There's been a ton of vitriol coming around through some of this, and I understand that. Michigan's Attorney General is on record making comments. Traverse City's mayor is on record making comments. Governor Whitmer is on record making comments. So it seems that a lot of folks have already decided Christine's guilt, which is maybe their prerogative. But when two of these three individuals I just mentioned happen to be part of the apparatus that are going to adjudicate these complaints, it seems to be a little bit of a setup. I mean, again, I'm not trying to take sides. I'm not defending one side or the other. This is merely another case of an executive branch agency with immense power that is essentially requiring an individual to make comments and give documents that could incriminate herself. That's basically what they're asking her to do, is to incriminate herself through this process of her going through interrogatories and these other things. Basically, the Civil Rights Department, it looks like from the documents I've received, are asking her to plead her case without ever getting any representation or anything like that. It's also worth noting that these complaints carry fines, $10,000 to $50,000 a piece. So she could be facing up to $150,000 in fines for some words that she put on a social media website. Again, she never once denied anybody service, or especially these three individuals that have filed civil rights complaints. Again, not asking you to agree with her stance or her comments, but it has to be examined that a person's right to free speech and a person's right to their religion, again, you don't need to agree with it. Parts I don't necessarily agree with, but I do agree with her right to free speech and her right to religion and her right to be able to say those things without reprisal. So here we have a case where simple language through the last few years, with specifically the words gender, being moved over from a scientific term, a sexual orientation term, as it relates to Elliott Larson Civil Rights Acts, and to be honest, at the federal level too, because there's a couple of cases that have been decided in the last couple of years, especially a cake case just this last June, I believe, where a baker in Colorado, both these cases came out of Colorado. One was a website developer, one was a cake maker. In both cases, the state, the government, was trying to compel these people to do something that basically was against their religion, and the Supreme Court upheld their right to religion. And it looks like, given this new lawsuit by Studio 8 and Christine Geiger, that seems to be the same lane that they're taking. And it seems that that's what she said in her Facebook post from the beginning, is, it's her religious belief. doesn't allow her to believe that there are human beings identifying as anything other than a male or a female. I.e., if you identify as a poodle and you want a poodle Fifi haircut, she's not going to give you that service. It is worth noting that a dog or a pet is not a human being, and therefore Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act does not provide protections under a protected class of pets or dogs or animals or, I always joke, giraffes. Somebody can come into my restaurant and identify as a giraffe. I don't care. You're still going to get the best barbecue in northern Michigan. That's just how it is. I don't care. This is where I differ a little bit with Christine. But again, I recognize her right to her freedom of religion, her right to free speech. There's a reason why the First Amendment is right to free speech. It's the most important. So it seems like there is a movement away from the traditional terms of sex and gender, and then convoluting gender. I shouldn't say convoluting, but moving gender away from that scientific term that it's been used in science and in government. This is the other point that I think that really needs to be made. And everybody needs to understand that there's a difference between science, government, and society, right? Science, when you go to a doctor, women are still undefeated. Men cannot give birth to children. There is no recorded case of a biological man giving birth to a baby. So chromosomal biological makeup is extremely important when speaking to a doctor. Now, if you make a transition from a man to a woman, you still have male chromosomes. So there are still medical procedures and things that are important to identify, whether you personally, societally identify as the opposite of what you were born as. That's not what I'm getting at. That's entirely up to you. As a libertarian, I believe that is your right to identify as whatever you want. But when there are things that specifically, like science and like government law, that have to delineate between male and female, or human being and animal, this is very, very important. And again, baseline. So sex, gender, and then gender identity or gender expression, right? There's three differences: science, government, and then society. Science, we've talked about. Government has laws that are based on classes. Now, classes have to be identified. And at this point in time, it does not look like animals are protected in the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. So if somebody comes into a hair salon in Traverse City and asks for a poodle haircut because they identify as Fifi the dog and they have a dog collar on or whatever it is, a business owner such as Christine does have the right to refuse that dog service. They don't have protections under Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. That is what it seems like on its face what Christine might be saying. Again, I'm not the apologist, defender, or any of this, but I have to have a voice of reason throughout this entire thing. Many people vehemently disagree with what she said, how she went about it, and subsequent remarks. I simply look at and say, I see what she's doing. She's trying to make a full frontal attack at Elliott Larson Civil Rights, and as she mentioned, some of the hate speech bills that were coming out of the legislature at the time. I don't know if I remember the numbers, 4474 or something like that. But this is what I find interesting about the entire social issue that has been at play. We saw Dave Chappelle in one of his last comedic specials talk about the trans movement, how he's been labeled as TERF and all these other things. J.K. Rowling has been attacked over the recent number of years because of her stance on some of these things. I'm not taking a stance. I'm simply looking at exactly what's happening in Michigan with new legislation and a private business owner that has taken to social media to express her personal point of view as it relates to her freedom of religion and her freedom of free speech. So what I have had Christine on the program before after she made those remarks. I've reached out to Christine again. She's agreed to pipe in. So let me see if I can get a hold of her real quick and see if we can drop her into the program. Hold on for me one moment. There she is. Hello, Christine. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm not echoing or anything in the background there.
Nope, it sounds great.
So I've been giving our viewers a breakdown of, I got my hands on what looks like your case that you filed last week. Was this Thursday that you filed this last week? Wednesday or Thursday?
Wednesday.
Wednesday
was filed, and Thursday I had the pleasure of serving the city with it.
So you are, for lack of a better word, suing. I don't like to use that word because it makes people automatically think that you're asking for money or a party is asking for money. This is actually a motion for immediate declaratory judgment. Now, some people that have been following our podcast might know what that means, but it's basically just asking for a statement, a declaratory statement or clarification in some cases. Those that have been following some of the things that we've gone through, the best case that we can point to is the declaratory action that I've got to remember their names now. The T&V Associates case, the catering company out of Macomb, they were looking for a declaratory action and ultimately got one. MCL 22253, I get all these numbers mixed up, is ruled unconstitutional because of that declaratory judgment. Now that we got that out of the way, you are suing the city of Traverse City and 3 individuals. Now, it's my understanding that these are the 3 private individuals that filed discrimination complaints against you and Studio 8 Hair Lab with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, MDCR, back in July. Was it July 8th? You posted on Facebook. We read it before in the previous segment, basically stating that you aren't going to be referring to anybody by a preferred pronoun. You might just say, hey, you. And that if somebody is seeking a particular pet style haircut or identify as an animal, they should probably get a haircut somewhere. I mean, is that relatively the gist of your comments?
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically. Just
so
not
this was
catering to coming off of Pride Month. I think I'd had it up to here, and this year felt like Pride year. It didn't feel like Pride Month. It just escalated to a whole nother level this past June, to which we have never seen before. And
is it just been Pride this year, or is it the overextension, if you will, of Pride Month? Because I mean, I've been to a few salons. I get my hair cut once in a while, and there are a lot of gays and lesbians and bisexuals that are in the salon business. I mean, you're not taking issue with the gay community at large, are you?
No, not at all. In fact, I empathize with many of them because many of them are conservative, and they put out a lot of effort and sweat and tears to get their movement the respect that it deserved and to be able to have the rights that they have earned, that they should have had to begin with. And then somewhere along the way in the past, 5-6 years, slowly but surely, we've seen whole nother agenda come in and basically infiltrate their movement and turn it into something that many of them can no longer even be proud of. It's the LGBTQ plus. We all know what the plus means. The plus stands for maps. It stands for who knows what else is going to be coming down the pipeline. But
yeah, and I think I've seen some of your additional comments.
yeah, so I don't have any issues with the lesbian, gay, and queer community. It is this trans movement that is going after our children, and that is what I am just have had it. I had enough of it, and that prompted me to post what I posted.
And I think I did see some additional comments and context that you provided, that this was relating to, was a discussion at the time about a House bill 4744. I get all these numbers
I
mixed
think
up.
it's 4474, and that one has to do with basically if that all passes, then we all will have to watch what we say living in the state of Michigan. If you hurt someone's feelings, you can be fined up to $10,000.
Where do you know where that legislation is at now?
I'm not sure. The last that I saw of it was in early August, and Governor Whitmer had signed it or had done something with it, but I don't know. I need to follow up and find out where it is in the process of being completely implemented or passed and, put into effect.
So as of right now, if somebody that comes in, and I don't know how you would necessarily know, but if a gay, lesbian, or bisexual individual comes into Studio 8, you're not going to deny them employment. You're not going to deny them any accommodation, a service, or anything like that, right? I mean,
no,
that's what you're saying, right?
That's what I'm saying. And in fact, I have clients that would fall under one of those categories. And
now, if somebody comes in and you mistakenly say Mr. or Mrs. or sir or ma'am, and they correct you and say, well, I prefer to be, a his or her, he, him, whatever. You're my understanding after reading this several times is that you're not going to deny them service. You just may simply say, hey, you. Right?
Yeah. Or if I know that their name is, Tom or Cindy, I may refer to them by their first name, but I'm not gonna alter what goes against my beliefs. And I believe that God created a man and a woman, and that's we should not be changing that. And if other people choose to change that, then they can choose to change that. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to participate in what they're doing that I do not believe falls in line with how we're supposed to be, how I choose to live my life.
So it looks like there's two approaches that you're going about this. And one looks like a freedom of religion aspect coupled with a freedom of speech aspect. Right. Is that right?
That is right.
And these three individuals and the city of Traverse City. So Traverse City has, and I'm just kind of learning about this too, a non-discrimination ordinance. Is that right? That carries $100 fine?
Yes.
And in my reading, I found that Traverse City, they did an investigation, or they decided that they weren't going to issue any charges or any violations of that ordinance. Is that right?
I don't know. I think that they left themselves they left the door open for the future to do so if they choose. Because I think that they use the words "at this time."
But the mayor of Traverse City is on record about making comments about your Facebook post, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I've reported on that before, and in an article last week about the civil rights complaints that you have received, as well as Dana Nessel has made comment as well.
Governor Whitmer has made comment. That's on record from a press conference that she had when she was in Northern Michigan in August. And
your state rep. too, right?
It's our
Betsy
state rep,
Gofia.
Betsy Gofia, has been
Okay.
very, very vocal about her opinions about this situation.
So the stage that you're, by looking at this, reading through this lawsuit, the stage that it looks like you're trying to set is one in which pits your right to free speech and right to religion against their civil rights complaints. I mean, is that the easiest way to put it?
Yeah. It's the civil rights, there's so many things that are not okay with how this has transpired. First of all, they're filing discrimination complaint against me for which I've never actually discriminated against them. They've never attempted to make an appointment, let alone come to my establishment and try to do a walk-in. I've never even laid eyes on them that I'm aware of. We've never had direct dialogue. They were simply offended by my publication, which my publication falls under the umbrella of freedom of speech. And they file these complaints with an agency that portrays itself to be so backlogged and so overrun with things that they have. Their workload, their caseload is so big. In fact, we had read an article, I believe it was the publication My Bridges, here in Michigan, that was published in August. I believe it was August 24th. And they were talking about how backed up and busy the Michigan Department of Civil Rights is, and that they had more cases than they had personnel and budget for, and that they're asking for more money. Well, what I'm experiencing firsthand doesn't look like an agency that is overrun and backlogged with so many cases that they can't get to them in a timely manner. My post wasn't even made until July 7th. And so, from July 7th, then we get 3 complaints that we know of. And those complaints somehow get escalated right to the top. And now they're putting all of their efforts into charging me and investigating me for discrimination. And, how many other people have cases that are valid cases that need to be looked at that the agency isn't even dealing with because they are using.
Here's part of the problem. Here's part of the problem. There are a lot of people that do think that this is valid.
Yes.
And in my opinion, and this is my opinion, the way that it's being portrayed by these individuals that have made comment have jumped the gun emotionally and maybe politically because of all of the Elliot Larson stuff that you previously mentioned with, this sort of exponential extension of Pride Month and everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my opinion. The only thing I know is this document sitting in front of me and the actual Department of Civil Rights complaints.
Right.
They are saying that you published discriminatory advertising, and in your lawsuit, it looks like you are really separating between your comments saying man and woman and people that are trying to identify as what would be an animal. And, I have kind of made a joke before that the Department of Civil Rights, Elliot Larson doesn't have any protections for Fido or for Fifi the cat. And I'm not trying to make light, but it's just the truth. I mean, if we're talking about logic, especially when it comes to science, and we're talking about a man and a woman, which is who you give haircuts, dye services, whatever it is that you do at Studio A, you provide those services to human beings. I think that's pretty simple to say, correct?
Exactly. And that's why I said, if you identify as anything other than a man or a woman, then you should probably go to a pet groomer, because my license means I work on humans.
Right. And that's a great point too, because, I don't know anything about the pet grooming business, but there may be licenses for that particular business. And I don't know. I have 2 dachshunds that never need haircuts, so I'm grateful on that one.
Yeah.
But so part of the reason why I've been following this case since its inception was first the free speech aspect. To me, free speech is such an important thing. I've been attacked for my own free speech with the pandemic stuff, yada yada. We don't need to talk anymore about that. The other portion I found fascinating about this was the power that the Department of Civil Rights has. They can fine, what is it, up to $50,000 per complaint. Is that right?
Yeah. And there's a rumor that there was an article published sometime this summer that mentioned in the article that there could be as many as 12 complaints. So right now we know about 3, but that's also part of why I have preemptively come back on from this approach to file the lawsuit or to file the motion that we filed last week, was because if there are more of these that are just going to start trickling in, we want to be able to put a stop to it, because enough is enough. And having the ability to have a judge in our courts here in Northern Michigan look at this is what is going to happen in order to make this stop.
So we've covered this a little bit, but I'll say it again while I have you. Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act has been around since 76 or 78. And then it was
76, I believe.
It was amended this last June, May, April, anyway, this year. So it looks like these 3 complaints that I have for Studio 8 Hair Lab are citing the sex portion of discrimination. And the new amendment to Elliott Larson that is going to take effect, what sounds like probably March 1st or the end of February now. 90 days, is it 90 days after the legislative?
81 days after the current legislative session ends, and they think they're scheduled to end
November 7th
January. Or 8th, something like that.
There you go. So just after the first year, probably around February. The new portion is amended to include the word gender identity or gender expression, I believe. I cannot remember. I get them mixed up.
I think it was gender identity.
So, and then the Traverse City ordinance has the words, I had it here somewhere in front of me. Biological makeup. Does that
Yes.
sound familiar?
Yes.
Yeah. So they're using different terms, and I don't know what the hell biological makeup means. I would presume, as a logical thinking person, you're either one of 2 sets of chromosomes.
Right, chromosomes. Yes, you're either X or Y.
Yeah. And I personally, I've said this before, and everybody's entitled to their own belief system. I absolutely don't care. I don't care that, Christine, you have your own set of beliefs and that you believe this. I could care less. Somebody could come into my restaurant or be a guest on this show and identify themselves as a giraffe. I don't really care. There may just be some underlying issues that person may eventually want to address. And that's just what science says right now. Right. But this is a really big issue with the trans community and with gender identification and gender expression and what's happening in schools. I follow a little bit what's going on in some of the school boards, and this is a really big issue with parents. And I know parents going to school board meetings are being targeted and watched and this, that, and the other. And a lot of it is because of some of these trans-related issues. I always take it back to what Chappelle said, which was basically, I don't care how you identify, but at what point do I need to participate in your self-esteem?
Right.
Simply put. I do think that this is a really important issue, and it sounds like, from what you have put on Facebook leading up to this lawsuit, this actually looks like, well, from the beginning, it was easy to see why people got so upset, because it was easy. You were made yourself an easy target for people that are emotionally irrational. And I'm not saying all of these people are. That's a big brush to use. But I can understand why it's easy, given the environment, to take somebody like you and vilify. And I think they're still probably vilifying you.
Oh yeah.
And they probably will even further,
Oh
which
yeah.
is a bit hypocritical, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when we were supposed to get our window replaced on Friday, and because we had vandalism this summer, such degree that it couldn't be cleaned up. I get it. Like, people are mad, they want to lash out. They're going to spray paint, toilet paper, something. Whatever. But when you don't when you take it past the point of something that can be cleaned up, and you permanently deface something, then that's where the real crime has happened.
Right.
And do you think that the city of Traverse City wanted to investigate that? No. Do you think the Record Eagle wanted to cover what happened? No. But what ended up happening is I had to get an entirely new window. And Friday they showed up to install it, and they realized that they forgot to order the safety glass because it's right next to a door. So now we get to go like however many more weeks before we get the window replaced. So, I mean, it's just, for anyone that thinks, oh, well, you deserve it because you posted something. Well, no, not really, because it is the United States of America, and we are allowed to speak our mind. And you know what? You can give me any consequences you want to give me. But when you start defacing my property and I have to spend money to fix it, then that is when there has been a crime committed. And that crime is on them, not on me. Hurting someone's feelings did not cost anybody any money. If anything, it might have cost me money in business that I wasn't going to get. So.
Well, and that's part of the consequence of free speech too, right?
Right.
I mean, you're never entirely devoid of the consequences.
Exactly.
Regardless,
and I understood that when I exercised my free speech, I understood that. But ironically enough, other than having to actually spend money on, cameras and replacing the window, as far as business goes, for the little bit of business that I did lose, I tenfold got more business. So, and it was never about getting more business. It was always about fighting for what's right and showing people that we do have a voice and it is okay to use it. And we have to fight for our kids.
Did you think when you were posting this to Facebook, was there a plan to take this issue on directly like this? I mean, did you know that somebody would file with the Civil Rights Department that is headed up by A.G. Nessel in order to begin the process of a declaratory action?
No way. I mean, I expected some backlash, some negative comments, some hate messages locally. But honestly, I never imagined that it would go viral like it did. And I still don't believe that it went viral all on its own. I think that it was just it was something that I happened to take the action I did, which is what many people on the other side were looking for. And I didn't know that. I mean, I just said what I said because I was fed up with watching our society cater to something that does not go along with my religious beliefs and how I'm raising my children. And I needed to be able to just once and for all say exactly that I don't agree with it and I don't want to participate in it and I'm not catering to it. And because I cannot do that from Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and then come back into my real life, which is what really matters. And, and be in my home telling my children that is not right. That's not how that God wants us to live. That is not something that we believe in. I can't parent and be a role model to my children at home and be one way and then go into work and completely go against all of those things and and be like the rest of society and just cater to this, because it had, at some point, people have to just say no, no more, and it's like, it just because it doesn't directly affect you doesn't mean that you have to just ignore it. Because I think it didn't directly affect me until it affected me.
So these three individuals, and I haven't published their names. They are public record now.
I
You
haven't
do,
either. Like,
you don't know these people.
I do not know these
You've
people, and
never serviced these people in any
no.
fashion.
No. Mm-mm. I mean, the only possibility is that there's one of them that I think was harassing me online. And she was, and I mean, I say harassing me, I didn't feel harassed. Like, I didn't feel like I am not a victim, but she was commenting to me, and we had exchanged through messages, publicly, comments on the post. And I only say that because there's one individual that would be using a nickname that is a derivative of the legal name that was used in the filing, and the same last name applies to the person online and the person that filed. But even when I shared a screenshot of the filing, I blocked out their names, just because people are going to find out if they want to find out. It's like you said, it's a matter of public record. But I just, with how hard the department is coming after me and the threatening tone of some of the language that they've used in the correspondence, I'm just not going to give them any extra ammunition to come after me and say, oh, well, you then, put these people out there so that they would now be harassed. No, I did not do that. And I made sure to take all precautions so that that wasn't the case. Now, if somebody decides to look the case number up online and they find out their names, oh, well, the freedom of information.
So moving forward, so with these three people, one is a man that identifies as a woman. The other two, I believe, given their given names, are women that are identifying as non-binary, correct?
I think so.
Right. That's what, in plain language, that's what it looks like to me. A name. This is not the name, but a name like Jessica up front would imply a female. So
I mean, a non-binary. Well, I mean, come on. Like, I'm not even going to sit here and try to define what they mean by non-binary.
Well, but I don't think that you need to, based on the simplicity of the law.
Right.
They're saying that they discriminate, that you discriminated by publishing and sex, and you did not, by the way I can read your Facebook post, is that you didn't discriminate against them. You discriminated against Fifi and Fido that wanted to come in and get a poodle's haircut. I know I'm making a joke about it, but it is a little bit on the absurd side. Again, I'm not trying to diminish anybody's feelings, but at the same time, we kind of have to draw a line at some point, and I feel like maybe that's what your lawsuit is trying to do.
Exactly. And, we cannot feel our way through life. That is just not, it's not how we can survive as humans.
Well, I'll tell you, there's a lot to be said about feelings, but when it comes to government regulation and government having to step in and identify certain things, when you're actually talking about being discriminated because of being a woman, that's a serious thing. And this, to me, honestly, again, this is my interpretation of this entire thing. It's bullshit. And I'm not a woman, but it kind of makes me offended for women, and I'll probably take some shit for that. But it's a little bit ludicrous. Again, that's just my editorial portion coming through. But when you look at what you said, that a lot of people don't like, but when you look at it, you're simply saying some very common sense things. And maybe that's why these people are upset, because you're pointing out common sense. And it may look like with this lawsuit, you're going to force a judge in Grand Traverse County. By law, this has to go and be heard in Grand Traverse. That's part of the reason why you filed this, right?
Right. Because, I mean, if I didn't file it here in Grand Traverse County, then what would be my alternative?
Right. So, well, I know what your alternative is.
Exactly.
Your alternative is administrative law hearings. And that was going to be my next question, is if you have participated in any hearing online or...
No, I'm not.
They've sent you questionnaires. Have you responded to questionnaires?
Yes, I have responded to questionnaires, but when I've responded, I've actually asked them questions back, and they've answered some of them. Some of them they've chosen not to.
I saw the words compel somewhere along the line right there, and it sounds like that you're also kind of challenging that. And this is again why I find your case and this whole thing sort of fascinating. Is this government agency that has immense power? Is they're not in this case writing the law and enforcing it. They're enforcing a law that may just very well be unconstitutional on its face. And especially when given weighted against free speech, this accommodation law really it doesn't seem to hold the same weight. And
it's they're basically like a parent taking sides. I mean,
right, and that's my point about government is they should never be in that position.
Exactly, and at least in most families, there's two parents, so at least you can split, you can conquer and divide or whatnot. But I mean, it's so funny because we have this agency that's supposed to be looking out for people's rights and civil rights. They certainly don't care about mine and anybody else that thinks like I do, because right now that doesn't fit their narrative.
Right, because actually by them filing civil rights complaints against you and this Facebook post, they're silencing your right to free speech is basically another way that this lawsuit is being interpreted by me.
Yes, and that's how I interpret it as well.
Okay. There was what other question did I have for you? I should have written it down. It was just popped into my head as we were having this discussion. Moving forward, what do you expect? So this was actually the question that I wanted to ask you, and it's rhetorical, but I want to get your take on it. The other reason that people don't like you, have come after you, have left your business, reviews, negative reviews, harassment online, the vandalism to your store. I think I read somewhere that there were some protests out across the street or something like that, right? Would it have anything to do with the fact that you are if I can say this, a MAGA Republican? Possibly.
I mean, I think that just gives them one more reason to not like me. And I think that makes them think that is what fuels anything I do, which is not the case. But I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a MAGA Republican, but I'm a MAGA patriot, because I believe in this country, and I believe in what America is supposed to be. And I am very sickened by what I see as the current state of America, because this is not the America that we grew up believing we were.
And the reason why I asked that, and I know you've been on the show before, and I've never really broached the topic about it, but given what's going on with politics, with the upcoming election, I found it fascinating, and I was not surprised that when I was attacked for keeping my restaurant open during the pandemic and after the election, after Trump lost, there was a bit of emboldenedness to some of these online attacks and some of these other things, framing me as a MAGA Republican and a Trumpite and all these things. And I wouldn't say I'm the opposite of that, but I'm just not that. I'm a libertarian. But when you start saying things like constitution and use words like tyranny and government overreach and limited government and these other things, it makes it very easy for people to kind of put you in a certain kind of category.
Yeah.
And I find it fascinating, sitting from where I sit, reading all of this stuff, that they're attacking you relatively in the same way that they're attacking me, though I was never called, a bigot or whatever other things that they're uh, trying to claim that you are. And through my dealing,
did they
go
think
ahead.
you were a transvestite yourself?
No, but I mean, they did think that I was killing grandmothers, and I always kind of likened it to, people thought I was killing babies out on Main Street. That's how upset people were with me. And it's this emotionally driven reaction that causes this rhetoric to get to a point that's just ridiculous. And then you can't even have a civilized conversation based on logic about these things when these other issues come into play that you're a certain political persuasion. Well, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what political side you aren't on, because there are Christians that are Democrats. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so when somebody asserts their right to freedom of religion, or when they say my religious belief does not allow me to, I can't even say accommodate, because you would accommodate them according to your words. It just, the intolerance and the hypocrisy is part of our narrative that I always try and point out here, and I think that there's a lot of that going on with you. Now, I'm not asking anybody to ride along with what you're saying or agree with what you're saying, but I simply want to point out some context and try and ratchet down the emotion around these things, because you can't have a conversation about any of it.
You can't have a conversation about very much in this world anymore.
And it's right, because people are becoming so polarized, and all they're seeing is a red button or a blue button, and people won't even engage with the opposite color, or people like me that, I don't want to say purple, but I'm libertarian. I can't even say necessarily independent, but it's fascinating how people want to just dismiss any idea that you have because of a preconceived notion that you might be a Republican or a Democrat or this, that, or the other. Some of my best friends are Democrats. Some of my best friends, I've got a friend of mine that I keep trying to talk him out of it, but he tells me that he's communist. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're definitely not a communist, just because you think that government should run some things, this, that, and the other. But I think he says it because he thinks it's sort of kitschy and cool and like in the now to be, well, I'm of communist persuasion. No, you're not. That's a failure to know your history a little bit. I love him where he's at. We play golf together all the time, and he's one of my best friends ever. And I actually love him for that, because he does give me a good perspective on things. Not that I would ever even come close to being considered a socialist, communist, any of that other kind of stuff. The nastiest one I am is capitalist, and I will never apologize for that. And I know you own a business, so you won't either.
No.
But I digress. Moving forward, what do you have any inkling or idea what to expect? I know you haven't done, the media has not really picked up on this. It seems like they didn't really pick up on, the 3 civil rights complaints that came out or last week or whenever it was. What do you foreshadow coming, as your attorney, giving you any kind of idea of what to expect?
I mean, we just don't know. We don't know.
You're kind of in uncharted territory, aren't you?
Yeah, because, I see if this doesn't get a lot of attention, then I think that's a real big indicator that the agency knows that they have a very flimsy cases. If they were so sure that they had such a strong case with me, then I feel like we would see them leaking this themselves. Like they would want it to get attention from their shedding light on what they're doing. I have reservations about how much publicity I want to give this, because I don't want to give people any um, any ideas about, cashing in on something. Not that I think that they're going to be able to, but I'm just getting real tired of having to respond to these complaints that I get. And so the last thing I want to do is keep responding to more of them, while we're waiting for a court date, while we're waiting for a judge to be assigned. This is completely uncharted waters for me. I don't know what to expect. I don't know if this will be done in 60 or done in 180 days. So I don't even know what the first date that we are looking at for a court date, and finding out what judge we're assigned. That's going to be interesting as well. So there's a lot of things that we just don't know right now.
Do you see this having any impact on the amendment to Elliott Larson that does include the words gender expression?
I would like to think that we could be working towards making that language something that is constitutional, because it's not as it stands. And if that's, and that's what we're all in, like, grace period, so to speak, right now. Like, this isn't in effect yet. If it goes into effect, it's not just going to change things for me. I mean, it's going to change things for everybody. It might even change things for the other side, the ones. I mean, so when all of this passes, and if let's say that nothing that we're doing right now is going to have any change or impact, and everything's just going to keep moving forward, and this is going to go into effect, what happens when they continue to spew their hate and their attacks towards you and towards me and towards anybody else that doesn't think like they do? Is our state really going to hold them accountable for attacking us? Because it works both ways. And so what's going to happen then?
That could be why the Department of Civil Rights is asking for more money, asking for more employees in that department, trying to expand that department.
It could be.
This to me, I did not know a lot about Elliott Larson. I watched, as the legislation was passed and the language that was in it, because language is so important these days.
It is.
And in your lawsuit, I noticed that you guys are breaking this down to the very definition, like Merriam-Webster's definitions, of what is sex. And it seems like that baseline is drifting away from that definition, and going through your declaratory action and reading Elliott Larson, it looks like there may be some flaws in the current version and in the new version that does include gender identity and expression. And that may be the portion that judges start to look at, is how are we defining gender identity and gender expression in order to say that a Christine or an Ian or whomever has a business is not accommodating this individual, because that's what race enumerates in Elliott Larson. It's what religion enumerates in Elliott Larson. The other classes that are pointed out have a very clear definition. It seems to me, by reading the amendment, that gender identity does not. And some of the versions of sex, as they're trying to be applied today, do not qualify as discrimination. Again, this is just by me reading the plain text of the language and the plain definition of sex. And I think, again, I'm going to say it again. It's so important that language be interpreted the way it was originally written. We can't go back and start changing things because we're feeling a certain way, or we have a certain faction of people that think that there should be a new class form, because that's essentially what Elliot Larson, the new amendment, did, as it seems, is create a new class to protect these people. And these other classes that have been previously mentioned since 1978 or 76, whichever one you mentioned,
76.
those are all really important. Religion is a very important class to protect. Race is a very important. I mean, we're still seeing this today with what's going on in Israel. How are we not standing behind protecting religion? That to me is, and again, I'm not a religious person. You're probably 10 times more religious than I am. And I'm not saying that as a knock. I'm just saying, again, this is the difference between me and you. I'm libertarian. You're Republican. I'm not necessarily quite so religious. I'm not atheist. I'm not going to go that far.
No.
But there are certain differences that we have. And I'm fascinated by the similarities of exactly what's happening to you with the public's reaction, with the government's reaction, everything that's going on. This case is, I think I'm going to get this term right, prima facie, at first glance or on its face. This looks like a case that, has never really been brought before. And again, I'm not a lawyer. I just pretend to be one on a podcast. So what I see from this and what I see from the other documents I've received is that you've set yourself up in a position to take a stance based on your freedom of religion and your freedom of speech in a Facebook post. 3 people have taken umbrage with that and said you violated their civil rights via advertising about sex. You are challenging and counter-suing, if you will, in Traverse City Court, these 3 individuals personally and Traverse City's non-discrimination ordinance. You're looking to have basically some things ruled as unconstitutional and or clarified. You don't know what's going to happen next. I'm interested to talk to your attorney one of these days and get his side of it. I'll try and see if we can get him on the podcast. Some of you may recognize his name on that document. The illustrious David Delaney, who is 24/7 counsel, as we like to joke, for the Iron Pig and myself. So in full disclosure, so I do know a few things about this case that might not necessarily be on these pages, but I appreciate you taking the time to come give some context and some clarity to this lawsuit. I will be fascinated to see where it heads, the public's reaction to it, the media's reaction to it. Have you received any kind of hate mail or anything since when did you say you filed Wednesday?
Yeah. Yeah.
And did you serve Traverse City last week?
I served them on Thursday.
So you served them on Thursday. Okay.
Have
you received any kind of emails or hate mail or anything?
Oh yeah, the phone calls started up again, and not to the level that they were in July, but we had a little quiet spell, and all of a sudden they started up again, and the the hate emails have started. I haven't had the physical hate mail come in yet. That was earlier this summer, but there was, for all the hate though, I have to say there was so much more support. You just didn't see the support as publicly as you saw the hate. But, for all the people that reached out and, sent me letters of support, messages of support, I was able to respond to almost all of them. I'm sure I missed a few. But I appreciate, some of those messages, I got them at just that right time when you're just feeling like the pressure. And then I'd open up my email, or I'd open up the mail, or listen to a voicemail, and it would be like that word of encouragement that I needed for that moment. So I appreciate that from everyone. It really meant a lot.
Well, you're definitely in uncharted territory. You're definitely, I would say, behind enemy lines, if you will. Traverse City is not a gigantic community, but for Northern Michigan, it is a large community, and I would say probably the most liberal city, if you will, up here in Northern Michigan. I love Traverse City. It's a beautiful place. We've often looked at opening an Iron Pig location downtown over there, but we're looking at maybe going a little bit bigger than that. So, thank you for
Thank you.
taking the time out of your day to join and give a little bit of context to this whole thing. Keep us in the loop if you get any more correspondence or any other complaints, or if you hear anything from the city on this. And we'll keep an eye on everything that's going on. Christine, thank you for taking the time to pipe in with us today.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, there you have it. Christine Geiger, owner of Studio 8 Hair Lab over in Traverse City, giving us some idea of what's going on with her lawsuit that she filed. She went out of her way. Now, again, I'll reiterate this. There is a thing in the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. The APA basically gives them an out to preemptively go to court in a local jurisdiction. Unlike what the Iron Pig went through in our administrative hearings, we weren't afforded the ability to go outside of the administrative hearings and ask for a constitutional question to be asked and answered. In the Civil Rights Department, they do get that opportunity preemptively. So what I had to go through, we had to lose in order to win. Studio 8, it looks like, by their citation, they get to go to a local court and have a question of constitutionality looked at. And that seems like that's what they're doing. We'll keep everybody up to date on this case and what happens with it moving forward. It is an important question, whether we're talking about civil rights, whether we're talking about freedom of speech, or we're talking about freedom of religion. These are important things to talk about. Again, you don't have to agree with Christine's comments or what she was saying or any of that, but do look at what is being done to her by a government agency and by folks that are misinterpreting the civil rights law and the new amendment that is coming down the pike next year. Again, these are all important issues. They revolve around several portions of our moniker: freedom, unity, entertainment, and liberty. This certainly falls under the category of freedom and liberty. We'll see what happens with Studio 8's case moving forward. There is a lot of aspects to this. We understand if people are angry and upset at her comments. We would just ask that you go back, read her comments, read this case. We'll provide a link for it in the comments of this podcast. These are important questions. Again, whether you agree with her or you disagree with her, everybody would agree that freedom of speech and freedom of religion are monumentally important, as well as civil rights protections for all of these classes. They're so very, very important. They allow people to have a level playing field and hold people accountable for when they violate certain things. Michigan Department of Civil Rights does have a place. The power that they have now is too big, and we know that they are ineffective at what they do. 60% of their complaints take 120 to six months or more to get solved. And somehow Studio 8's three cases, have bubbled up to the surface in less than 30 days in the case of the first complaint. So there are a lot of forces at work here. We'll keep on top of this. We'll see what happens moving forward. Hopefully, we get to see an impartial judicial system working. Hopefully, we'll see the Attorney General's office keep their nose out of it and let it be handled the way that it should be handled and adjudicated properly. I have a feeling that Dana Nessel will try and reach in and take this case out, but the APA and the court rule requires that it stay over in Traverse City. And that's why Elections are so important, especially local elections being monumentally important. The judges that you elect to these seats are the ones that make the most important decisions for us locally and statewide. So, having said that, thank you guys for tuning in to Fuelcast TV. Subscribe if you haven't already. Drop some comments. Like them, don't like them. Leave us some comments. If you're looking for anything Fuelcast related, jump online. Fuelcasttv.com is where you find us. Any streaming platform, Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, all of those platforms we're dropping podcasts on. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'm Ian Murphy. We'll see you later.